We're back with two more videos that, hi ladies and gentlemen, we're back with two more videos that I'm recording for YouTube. We are in Deuteronomy chapter 14 for this one. So let's start the reading. As you see by the top of it, this is about clean and unclean animals. This would be in reference to Israel, not to Christians. Okay? The Levitical laws and the Old Testament Torah stuff, that's for Jews. Okay? It wasn't extended to the Gentiles. Verse 1, sons you are of Yahweh. So this statement right here extremely defeats Islam, because in Islam you cannot be a son or a daughter of Allah in any sort of way. Okay? But this verse tells us that we are sons of daughters. Now, keep in mind, this is talking about the Israelites, not talking about us. Okay, so I just want to reference that. But we do know that in the New Testament, we are also called sons of God, sons and daughters of God. Okay, so that's where I'm connecting it to. Anyway, sons you are of Yahweh, singular context. Your God, plural context. Remember, your God is just what God is, not who he is. Yahweh is who he is. Not you shall cut yourselves and not make a baldness between your eyes, right? So in other words, what that means is that Israelites had to be unibrowed. Okay, they had to be unibrowed, so they would have to have a connected eyebrow. And on the behalf, you shall not make baldness for yourselves on behalf of the unalived, or on behalf of the dead. Now, keep in mind that although this is talking about having unibrowed and making cuts for yourselves, which would be tattoos, this is specifically for the purpose of the dead, as we see in the end of this. On behalf of the dead. That's what this whole phrase in 1 is talking about. Okay? And it says, then it gives you the reason why. For a people holy you are to Yahweh your God. You are holy people, set apart, sacred. Okay? So I want you to hear that. You are sacred, you are set apart. For Yahweh your God, and you has chosen Yahweh, meaning God has chosen you, Yahweh has chosen you, to be his people, a special treasure, something precious, above all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. So basically, Israelites at that time, with this covenant, they are established as the most precious people on the planet. Think of it like how celebrities are held to a huge level that no one else pretty much is held to. Right? They have rights and privileges and treated so extravagantly. Right? The Israelites at that time were spiritual celebrities, if you will. In God's eyes, they were spiritual celebrities, as in, these are mine, and these people that I love so much, they're going to be the ones that I give the extreme favor to. Okay? Not you shall eat any detestable thing. Right? So who's the one, as we see, who's the one that dictates what is detestable? Yahweh is. This is the animal. So then it goes into detail about what this detestable thing is. What is this detestable thing? This is the animal that you may eat. So these are the list of animals that you may eat. You may eat ox, lamb of the flock, goats, deer, gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. Okay, so these are the land animals, basically, the grazing animals for the most part that you're allowed to eat. So it gives a direct listing of animals that you can eat that are not detestable. This next section in verse 4. Okay. And then it goes on in verse 6 and says, and every animal dividing hoof, meaning having a split hoof, and having split the cleft into two hooves, bringing up the cud, meaning eating cud, eating grass or plants, among the animals you may eat. Okay, so now this includes things like uh, cow, for example. Okay, would be one example. I'm sure there's other ones, but you get the idea. And these animals like the gazelle, the deer, the goat, and all of those fall into that same category because they still eat cud as well. Nevertheless, this nut you shall eat. So now verse 7 switches to the things that you cannot eat for the Israelites, keeping that in mind. Okay. Of those bringing up the cud, so of the ones that bring up the cud, and of the dividing hoof, cloven, the camel, the hare, so you can't eat camel, you can't eat rabbit, and the rock badger, you can't eat that. For are bringing up the cud, they, and hoofed not. So while they do qualify, so let me kind of break this down for you. Although the hare, right, and the camel do eat grass, they do eat cud, right? They don't have split hooves. Okay. Hoof and not they have divided. Unclean they are for you. Right? So they couldn't eat rabbit. And the swine, the pig, is divided in his hoof. And not bringing up the cud, it does not eat grass. It does not eat cud. It does not graze, in other words. So it's unclean. It is unclean. This would be ritualistic unclean to eat it. So the reason it gives these specific things is that it's showing you that while they do fit into one category of, like, for example, the hare, the rock badger, and the camel, they do eat cud. They do qualify as that part, but they don't qualify as having the hoof being divided. Okay? And then it goes on and saying, well, on the other side, the pig, the swine, right? Although it does have a divided hoof, so it does qualify as that part, it doesn't qualify as bringing up the cud. Okay? And it says, it is unclean for you, their flesh, meaning their meat. You couldn't cook it, you couldn't eat it. That's why we're not allowed to eat pigs specifically for the Jews, though. Right? Because I'm looking at this from the perspective of a Jew. A Jew would not be allowed to eat pigs. That's why I said I, even though technically I'm not a Jew. These flesh not you shall eat, and their carcass not you shall touch. This you may eat of all. So now it lists up more. This you may eat of all that are in the waters. So now it moves from land animals to water animals. Okay? In the waters. All that have fins. So any creature that has a fin and scales. Fins and scales. Like fish, for example. You may eat. And whatever not does have fins, if it doesn't have a fin like an eel, right? And it doesn't have scales like oysters, not you shall eat it. It is unclean for you. Okay? So we're going to look at this list of clean and unclean animals here in a moment. Actually, let's go do that now. Okay, so let's look at the things, okay? To be considered ritually clean, meaning something you're allowed to do for the Jews, the land animals would have to have split hooves and chew cud. The examples are cattle, which are beef and veal. So yeah, cattle would fall into that. Sheep, goats, deer, elk, and antelope. Seafood must have both fins and scales. So examples are salmon, tuna, trout, cod, snapper, right? Those are clean ones. And then for the birds, clean birds are non-predatory, non-scavenging, right? So like a vulture would be a predatory one, a scavenging one. Examples are chicken, turkeys, ducks, geese, and quail. And examples of insects are locusts and grasshoppers. So now we move to the unclean list. Unclean animals generally consist of predators and scavengers. Okay. Land animals that would qualify as animals that would be unclean would be animals that do not chew cud or do not have a split hoof. Pigs, bacon, ham, pork, camels, rabbits, horses, and donkeys. You couldn't eat those for the Jews. Predatory or carnivores such as dogs, cats, lions, tigers, bears, wolves, foxes. You couldn't eat those either. Now we're moving on to the sea animals. Water creatures lacking fins and scales include bottom dwellers and scavengers. So you're noticing this scavenger thing consistently. Okay. Shellfish, so shrimp, crab, lobster, oysters. Catfish, sharks, whales, and dolphins. You couldn't eat any of that. I'm sure there's more that would qualify, but you get the idea. Birds of prey, such as eagles, vultures, owls, hawks, or gulls, you could not eat those. Reptiles and amphibians, such as snakes, lizards, turtle, frogs, you could not eat those. So those are just a few small lists of some animals. I'm sure there's a more comprehensive list, but you would have to go one by one of all the animals that exist and go, do they qualify under this clean rule or do they qualify under the rule of unclean? So hopefully you get the context. Okay. So moving on. If it didn't have a fin or scales, you couldn't eat it. It was unclean to you. All birds clean you may eat, and these are which not you shall eat. The eagle, the vulture, and the buzzard. So it tells you the ones you can't eat. And the red kite, and the falcon, and the kite after its kind. So those are birds that you couldn't eat. And every raven after its kind. And the daughter of the ostrich, so offspring of ostriches. And the shriek owl, and the gull, and the hawk, the little owl, and the screech owl, and the white owl, and the desert owl, and the osprey, and the cormorant, and the stork, and the heron, after its kind, the hoopie, and the bat. So even would include the bat. And every swarming thing that flies is unclean for you. So now it switches to bugs. Not you shall eat. All clean birds you may eat. Not you shall eat any of the carcass to the sojourner who is within your gates. You may give it that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner, for a holy people you are. So although the Jews were not allowed to eat these things themselves, they were allowed to give them to people that were not Jews. Okay? For a holy people you are to Yahweh, your God. Not you shall boil a young goat in the milk of its mother. Okay? Now we move on to giving tithes. Now that first part, the only parts I want to give you for that is a few verses. Okay? So give me a second. Because I did write this down, but I ended up moving it to a dry erase board. So here's the pieces you're going to need. Okay. Christians are not under the law. Leviticus 26:46, Deuteronomy 4:8, Psalms 81:4, and Romans 9:4. They all show that the Mosaic law is for Israel. It's for Jews. Christians are not mandated by this law. Okay? Christians are not under the law, as we see by the following verses. Matthew 5:17, that Christ did not abolish the law, it's still there. Romans 6:14 and Romans 3:31, which together, I forget which one's which, but one of them says that we are not under the law, we are under grace. And the other one says that even though we're not under the law, we still uphold and respect the law, and we're allowed to join into the law if we want to. And then other verses are Matthew 15:11, Hebrews 8:13, and Romans 14:3, which are associated with specifically aspects of us. We are under the covenant of grace. That's why for in the New Testament it says God has cleansed all food, so you can eat anything now, although a lot of things would have direct dangers with it, such as even though I could eat pork and I'm not made more sinful by eating pork, me eating pork would have health issues different from eating beef, for example, or chicken. Okay. Now, those are just some verses with that. And so the idea is that the Mosaic law is for the Jews. It was a law established for the Jews and only for the Jews. However, anyone who rejects the law of grace that Christ established will be judged by the law. So basically, if you're not in the covenant of the law, you're basically having to earn it. You're having to live up to the Ten Commandments and as well as all of the different rules. So the question for you is, do you want to live this life to try to live up to all of the laws and rules of God and try to do it on your own? Or are you going to be someone who goes, I don't need to live up to it. I can still do it as a sign of love for God, but I don't want to be under that kind of covenant where I have to earn it. Because it would be a lot harder to earn my salvation than it would be just to receive my salvation from the Lord. So, next section is talking about tithes. Okay. Tithing, you must tithe all the increase of your seed that produces the field year by year. Right? So there was a certain amount of tithing. And you shall eat before the face, that means in the presence of God, be thankful to Him, in the place where He chooses. So basically, you eat where He tells you to eat, to dwell His name. There, the tithe of your grain, and your new wine, and your oil, and the firstborn of your herd, that would be the first one born, actually, in that context, and your flock, so that you may learn to fear Yahweh your God. So what's the reason why you give these tithes? As a sign of fear, which would be reverence for Yahweh your God, all the days. But if is too long for you, the journey. So if the journey happens to be too long, for what reason? Now let's give context. If it's too long so that not you are able to carry it, or if it is too far from you, the place where it chooses Yahweh your God to put His name there, when He blesses you, Yahweh your God, and you shall exchange it for silver, and take the silver in your hand, and go to the place that chooses Yahweh your God in it. And you shall spend the silver for whatever desires your soul, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, that would be alcoholic drink, or for anything that desires your soul, you shall eat it there before the face of Yahweh your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your house. Okay? And the Levite who is within your gates, not you shall forsake. Don't stab them in the back. For not is unto him a portion of the inheritance with you. So be very kind to him, because he doesn't share in what you have. At the end of 3 years, you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce of the year that year, and store it up within your gates. And may come the Levite, for not is to him a portion of the inheritance with you, and the sojourner, and the fatherless, and the widow, who is within your gates. And they shall eat and be satisfied, that may bless Yahweh your God in all the work of your hand that you do. So, in other words, a portion of your harvest is supposed to be set aside for certain people. Okay. I know this from my reading before, that a certain portion of your crop field would be left. You would not be able to harvest that section of it, and it would be left for the traveler and homeless ones and all of that. So I hope you get the context. Now, technically, there would not be a whole lot here for you, to be honest with you, other than the fact of this, what I'm about to say, which is that although we are not under the law, you can still choose of your own free will as a free will offering to God to go, hey, I'm not going to eat pork. And God's going to honor that, just like he would honor the one who chooses to eat pork. He doesn't see any differently between the two. Okay? At least as far as the New Testament goes. And I want to emphasize that because the Old Testament, that was under you earning it. And it was for Jews. And the Gentiles wouldn't even be included in that Old Testament. You never see any Gentile be included in that Old Testament covenant unless they became circumcised and started living as though they were Jews, meaning to convert to Judaism. Then that would apply to them. But just being a Gentile, no. Okay? Now, so let me give you an example. If I eat pork today, sorry, I'm yawning. If I eat pork today, okay, I am not made more sinful as a Gentile than someone who is not eating pork, right? However, if I eat pork, there are health issues such as high cholesterol, high blood pressure, all these other things, as well as possible parasites that would come from the meat of pig that you would not get from meat of like cow or chicken, right? We all know this. You eat chicken and cow, it's way healthier. There's way less fat than eating pig. Plus, look at what pigs eat. Pigs will eat anything under the sun. They don't care if it's rotten, not rotten, whatever. Pigs, vultures, bats, a bunch of these creatures that are forbidden, they are the world's garbage system. Right? Vultures and animals, they deal with, corpses and dead animals like roadkill, and pigs will eat, a bunch of stuff. Alligators eat anything in the water, right? If it's dead, they'll clean it up and eat it. They won't leave it there. Sharks do the same thing, right? Sharks will pretty much eat anything. They're like the ocean's garbage disposal system. Okay, so hopefully you get the context, keeping in mind that this section of the Old Testament is only for Jews. It's not for Gentiles.